Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable, and we are recording today from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. Today is Sunday, October 1st, 2017, and this morning Elizabeth will read our morning prayer from Mrs. Eddy that was given at the Massachusetts Metaphysical College. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay. O my God, I offer as a consecrated gift upon thine altar a heart dedicated to thy service, lips speaking only words of charity, love, and truth, thoughts striving to be only the true thoughts of the mind of God. Help me to endure unto the end, strong in the faith, powerful in the truth, all the influence that I can bring to bear, all the force of tongue or pen that is mine, I offer in thy service. May heaven help, consecrate, and accept.
Thank you. And then from Miscellaneous Writings, page 279, Mrs. Eddy. We today in this classroom are enough to convert the world if we are of one mind, for then the whole world will feel the influence of this mind, as when the earth was without form, and mind spake, and form appeared. And next week, Florence, I believe you volunteered to read. Is that
yes.
right? Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. All right, our subject today, unreality. Golden text, Psalm 89:14. Justice and judgment are the habitation of thy throne. Mercy and truth shall go before thy face. Now, yesterday we had a good Bible study on the Beatitudes, and one was, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And then there was one aspect of mercy that we have yet to talk about, which is in this lesson this week. So what do any of you know what that aspect of mercy is?
Justice is?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health on page 36, I'll just find it. Divine science reveals the necessity of sufficient suffering, either before or after death, to quench the love of sin. To remit the penalty due for sin would be for truth to pardon error. Escape from punishment is not in accordance with God's government, since justice is the handmaid of what?
Mercy.
Mercy. What does Mrs. Eddy say that the purpose of divine love is to do what?
The design of divine love is to reform the sinner.
Thank you. To reform the sinner. And she says over and over in this week's lesson, and was also read by Gary on Wednesday night, I had to bring those readings, anyway, that in order to have reform, what must you also have? In most cases.
Repentance.
Yes, and before repentance, what?
Suffering.
Yes. And no one likes to talk about this topic, which is why I am talking about it. And especially as Christian scientists. And even now I could always tell, if ever I say anything about the BOD or anything like that, we must be loving. We must be loving. God is love. Yes, that's true. We must be loving. But she says over and over again that the sin has to be exposed and repented upon, right? Yes, it does. And this is part of love, part of mercy. It's what happens. Love doesn't do it, but as we've talked about over and over again, the sin will punish itself. It will bring suffering. She's quite clear. My goodness. in the lesson, where she says, "Alas for those who break the faith with divine science and fail to strangle the serpent of sin, as well as of sickness. They are dwellers in the deep darkness of belief. They are in the surging sea of error, not struggling to lift their heads above the drowning wave. What must the end be? They must eventually expiate, that means to atone for, their sin through suffering. The sin which one has made his bosom companion comes back to him at last with accelerated force, for the devil knoweth his time is short. Here the scriptures declare that evil is temporal, not eternal. The dragon is at last stung to death by his own malice. But how many periods of torture it may take to remove all sin must depend upon sin's obduracy, which means what?
Of tenacity.
Yes.
Won't yield.
Won't yield. Hardness of heart.
And whose stubborn tenacity are we talking about?
Human mind. Our own.
Oh.
Yes. It's the human mind, but
it is
our own.
It's a question of whether you make it your own or not.
Now, have any of you ever felt tortured?
Yes. Yes. Not at all.
I know. Florence is so wonderful.
Florence, it's so nice to know that you've
Yeah, right.
What an inspiration.
Well, I'd be careful to say it's your own, instead of saying, yeah, it's my human will. I made it my own, but it really is not my own.
Thank you. That's a good clarification. Yes. The human mind, it's not your own. We think it's our own. We clasp it to our bosom. We go around and around and around with it. You know, doing this deliberately for long periods of time, or you know, it would be the result of some of these insidious diseases. Now, all of this is in belief. It's true. It's all the Adam dream, and it can be, you can awaken from it, and that's the marvelous thing about science. It's not the truth. It is not yours. But you have to have a clear understanding of it, and you cannot avoid the subject. And believe me, I spent years avoiding the subject.
Trying it.
Trying to, yes, and wanting this nice, God is love, we don't talk about anything unpleasant. But you can't, you've got to do this. Mrs. Eddy says it. And you can't skip over these passages and pretend they don't exist and just jump to the more pleasant ones. In her article about the sword, putting up the sword, does anyone know that article and what she says? Put up thy sword. It's in miscellaneous writing.
You can't put it up unless you've had it out first.
You can't put it down.
You can't put it down, and then you have to have it out before you can. You have to fight it first.
Right. Jesus was able to put it up because he had completed the battle. But we can't put it up until we complete the battle. And as long as we're here with sin, disease, and death appearing real around us, we haven't completed the battle yet.
The first time, and I remember it, I went to it was a board meeting in this church. I was fairly new. Mrs. Evans was chairman of the board. I forget who read that, put up the sword, put up thy sword. I had never heard it before. I'd been a scientist for a while. I never read prose works, was not familiar with this. And I was almost in a state of shock. It made so much sense to me at the time, but I never heard that. I always wanted the sword away. My favorite commandment was always, blessed are the peacemakers. We'll get into that at one of our Bible studies. But, you know, that was what I thought we were all about, always. Not ever to wield the sword. But when you understand that it is not person, place, or thing, but animal magnetism, you can wield it, and you will wield it well, and you will do it, because who wants to suffer or be tortured? And all the suggestions of the human mind are torturous. And they're not nice, and they're called, there's a word for it. What's the word? Do you know what word I'm looking for? It's blank mental suggestion.
Aggressive.
Aggressive. What's aggressive?
Won't let up.
Yes. So if you're just a nice little wimp, it will try to torture you with all its suggestions.
And if you continue to be a wimp, it will succeed.
So, my friends,
or appear to succeed in your dream.
You put the sword up. And you have to have that sword in your hand, always. Sword in one hand, a tool in the other. Now, we will go to, in the forum, it was Ray put up a watching point. And just read the watching point. Linda.
Okay. The watching point is number 371. Watch that in your work for individuals and the world, you handle the belief in chemicalization. War may result when students work for the world and pour in a sweet consciousness of God's presence and government, and then fail to handle chemicalization. We must declare and know that the truth which we reflect goes forth to bless, and not in reality to destroy error, since there is none to destroy, other than in belief. The truth we send goes out forth to feed mankind spiritually, not to harm them. All mankind are ideas of God, and so they receive this truth and love it, and in reality have no mortal thought to be stirred or upset by it. We must know that no one possesses a mortal mind that can oppose truth, and that mortal mind does not possess anyone.
Okay, comments?
This is a real challenge, isn't it? Mrs. Eddy talks about chemicalization. She tells us what it is. And what does she say chemicalization is?
Isn't it error coming to the surface?
Yes, it is.
It's when we feel error coming to the surface and putting up a fight. And what does this watching point say about that process?
Handle it.
You have to recognize that it's not something real putting up a fight, that it's not something that you have to fear or be terribly concerned about, except that you not be mesmerized by it.
Or think it is you. It's error fighting for its life. And it's a good thing, because the louder error screams, what?
Well, it's defeated. I mean,
The riper it is for
It's getting
what?
ready for
for
destruction.
destruction.
Yes.
And where does the destruction take place?
In mind.
Thought, consciousness.
In
Mind.
your consciousness, yes.
Sometimes in working with a practitioner, especially early on, when they address things, you will feel uncomfortable, some people have put it. It's usually the fear or pride or whatever that's coming up to the surface.
I would feel it, and then I would just say, okay, I know what this is, and I'm just going to go through it. And often the change and the peace that would come afterward was definitely worth the stirring. And I would recognize it, and I would just go on my way. and just even sometimes I would just say, whatever I need to know, God, let me know. I need to know, and then I would just say, please wash, whatever it is away.
Thank you.
And you know the error has been hit.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. A practitioner will always know when the air has been hit by a reaction that they get. Sometimes they don't hear from the person again. So, and I mean, maybe eventually it will dawn on them that what was done from love to help, not to make them necessarily feel uncomfortable. But if they do, that's okay. It's coming to the surface to be washed away. It's a good thing. Nothing to fear.
I used to put up a wall, and I could feel it go up. And when I get a correction, I used to have to say, thank God this person loves me enough to correct this error. And after a while, I stopped putting up the wall.
That's good. Well, beautiful.
Yeah, that's the key. If you can tell that the wall is starting to go up and recognize it for what it is, then you've really made a huge leap of progress in Christian Science. Because then you make yourself receptive to the change of base that Mrs. Eddy talks about is necessary for all of us to go through.
The other trick is, too, then you try to be good so you don't get correction. And I remember reading with Mrs. Eddy that then you're not growing then. You're not going to grow if you don't allow yourself to be corrected or make mistakes or let it be uncovered. It's going to be uncovered no matter what, so you might as well just go.
Right. It will.
I think sometimes it's good to be like Peter and just put it out there.
Just put it out there.
Those are good. That's a good way. Mike is that way. Mike puts it all out there. That's great.
And it's also great for us to see.
It is. It is. If you really want to learn, you just put it all out there, and if you get a correction, okay, you've learned. If you back off and don't ever do anything, well, then that puts you in a certain spot. You need to come out into the light and not fear it.
This is why you have to get rid of what?
Pride.
P-R-I-D-E.
Exactly. So if your pride gets hurt, well, that's a good thing. And if you are, hungering and thirsting for the truth, you will get to where you will let your pride get hurt. You'll be okay with that because you recognize that something is being gotten rid of that was never your friend.
And you're able to be honest to yourself.
Yes. Yes. Because up until then, you've been fooling yourself. Just as Linda says, you really can't fool your practitioner. I mean, she knows when you're trying to just be nice. Whether she lets you go on that way or not depends on your worth in a way, or your readiness. But you can't hide it. You try to hide it from yourself. That's why all this talk that you're always telling yourself, oh, I know that. Yes, I do this. Yes, yes, yes. You're always talking this stuff to yourself. Well, just calm down and really find out what you're really doing, okay? What are you really doing? If you're having to talk yourself into it, it's usually you're covering up what you're really doing. Just covering up a lot of fear and pride and other things.
Or what you really know that you can prove.
Yes. Yes, what you really know and can prove. So this is a good process. It should be, you can welcome it. You are changing your change of base from the material to the spiritual. You will come out a different person if you allow the process to take place. And it requires humility, an ability to repent and be sorry, truly sorry for what you've done. And all the things we've talked about in our Bible study as far as the Beatitudes. And mercy loves you enough not to want to leave you in that position of torment, torture, sickness, fear, pride, doubt. It's the handmaid of justice. Now, to get back to the watching point, yes, in doing a watch, We do. It's very, very important to understand the allness of God and the nothingness of error. But, did any of you read what the beautiful article Parthens wrote about Esther and how she watched? What did it require of her? He called it the outward watch and the inward watch.
Is that oneness with God? She just is letting go of self completely and being at one with God, recognizing the omnipotence, omnipresence, and the omniscience.
And did that state of thought come in just a few minutes of work?
3 days.
3 days, he said.
It's 3 days. 3 days to get it right, to cast off personal sense, to starve it out, to refuse to be overwhelmed by an error and to align completely with mine, to render irrelevant in her own mind the subject of Haman's genocidal intentions, his seeming unlimited power and freedom to act upon them. 3 days to render thought of Haman as nothing. 3 days for it to be miniaturized, then micro-miniaturized, then finally annihilated into the absolute nothingness as she obeyed the first commandment to have no other gods before me. So, this is what it requires of us. I believe it was in Watch's Prayers and Arguments. Yes, it was, in the beginning of it. That if you want to do a good watch, that book is essential for you to read and study, in the first pages of it, describing it. But he talks about, Carpenter, about the watches, watching. It gets you to a state, or it should get you to a state where you are doing it what?
All the time.
Yes.
Naturally.
Yes.
All the time.
Thank you.
All the time.
Naturally, all the time. You're always there. So, when you're doing that, then this, 3 days, still, if you were confronted with something like that, it might take 3 days. Mrs. Eddy once told her students who were watching what? Do you remember, Carol?
Well, there was one time where she told them to watch and keep watching. And she didn't tell them what there was to watch for, but she felt the need to watch. And they watched for 72 hours.
Without taking their clothes off. And when it was over, she said, okay, the work's been done. And you can know darn well that that's what they were doing, this description that Parthens gave us of Esther. Fasting from the error and only knowing the truth. And, as was brought out in that watching point, this can prevent wars.
And it's highly likely that that's what was going on for those 3 days, Mrs. Eddy's time.
Absolutely it was, yes. So, all of this whole lesson, the story of Esther, all of these things that we do, our Beatitudes, they are teaching us how to stay in the right mind, to watch continually, and to do this work for God. Not to be made to forget or neglect our duty to God, our leader, and to mankind. And when you allow your thoughts to become overcome by aggressive mental suggestions, whether you're sinful or sick or whatever, that's the purpose. So you're rendered ineffective. Tremendous thing, this science that we've been given. So any questions or comments on that before we go on? Okay, then I believe I will have Linda read what Parthens wrote about the address to George Washington.
Do you want me to just read the part about what George Washington said?
Yes.
Okay. The quoted from George Washington's farewell address. Quote, "And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." And he also wrote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens." End quote.
Go ahead, read on what he said.
Yeah, Lily. And then Parthens writes, "The aim and error of Haman in every age is to create political prosperity without Judeo-Christian values, and to exert political influence to overthrow the influence of spirit upon a nation's laws and culture. We who cherish spirituality are the Mordecais and Esthers of this age. We must first understand, then claim and exercise the vast spiritual authority we have over all the Hamans of this age."
Thank you. You see, he impersonalized it. Hello, Tom.
Good morning.
Thank you.
He impersonalized the era, showed how to handle it. Haman, who can tell the story of Esther? Anyone? Please. Tom taught it.
Oh, so everybody's looking at me. Esther had no parents. They had died, and so her, not quite sure who he is, but her father was his uncle, and so he raised Esther as if it was his own daughter.
Mordecai.
Mordecai, yes, thank you. So you can fill in the gaps here. So, okay, so then she was fair and beautiful, and she ended up becoming the queen. And
they lived in Assyria because they were in captivity at the time, actually. So it was the king of Syria or some other country other than
Yeah,
I thought it was the Babylon.
Or Babylon.
They were taken captive.
But it was not Israel.
Right, it was not Israel. You're right. So the time frame is that this was after the kingdom of Judah had been overtaken by Babylon, and the Jews had been taken back to Babylon and were living there. So they lived there for like 70 years before they went back, roughly speaking. So anyway, so Mordecai saw that there were two people who were at the door who were plotting against the king. I think that's what he called his king. And so through Esther told the king about that. And so the king had those two people hung. Since they were manning the door, I think that they must have been some very special protectors or something like that. So this was kind of egregious, but they were hung. The story was written up in the Book of Chronicles, not what we see in the Bible, but something for Babylon and the king. And then later, the king had trouble sleeping, and so he woke up and he had people read the Book of Chronicles for him. And they came across that story about Mordecai and the two doorkeepers. So then the next day he asked Haman, Haman. Okay, Haman, what should he do for someone who's, done such a, I forget the words, but, something, really noteworthy, let's say. And Haman thought he was talking about himself and said, he should do all these things like put his robe on, his crown, his ring, and put him on a horse, and wonderful. Because he thought he was talking about him. And so the king said, okay, good, so we'll do that. And it turned out to be Mordecai, so he did that for Mordecai. Anyway, A little hazy on details. Someone can tell me about
How about
just
Haman?
fill this
Well,
in
they,
on
yeah,
what Haman was doing for the Jews.
I'll fill in if
Okay,
you want.
thank you.
If you want.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, the king likes Haman and gives him rule over all of his princes or whatever, and Haman happens to hate the Jews. So Haman secretly has a conspiracy in mind against the Jews.
Oh, and everybody saw what I posted this week. There's some little background of why he hates the Jews.
Well, for whatever reason, so King promotes Haman. So Haman goes around and everybody salutes Haman, bows to him, except Mordecai. And Mordecai hangs out at the gate of the king because he wants to make sure that Esther is okay. But he does not bow to Haman, and Haman notices it and hates him for it.
And I think that's partly why that he hated the Jews. Because that was one of the reasons.
Yeah. So Haman goes to the king and says, I want to punish people who aren't doing the right thing, and so the king says, okay, go ahead, not knowing that Haman really wants to get rid of all the Jews. So Haman conspires all of the army to go around the entire country and round up the Jews and kill them. And when the king gives Haman authority to do something, not knowing what exactly all of it was, Esther's handmaidens find out about it, and they tell Esther about it. And Esther realizes something really, really horrible is about to happen unless she does something about it. And that is when the 3 days took place, and she asked the king if she could talk to him and invite Haman to a meal that she would sponsor. So the king agrees to it. The king asked her, well, what is it? What do you want? And she said, I'll tell you when you come with Haman. So she arranged this meeting with the king and Haman. And it was the day after the king couldn't sleep.
Yeah, thank you.
And when the king couldn't sleep and told Mordecai, or told Haman to take these gifts to Mordecai, Haman was really pissed off and upset because Mordecai was the guy that he hated. So it was the next day that Haman and the king went to this meal that Esther had sponsored. And so the king asked her then, what is it? And that was when she said, I would like you to intervene and save my life and the life of my people, because someone in our kingdom has conspired to kill us. And the king is flabbergasted. He is so upset. He said, you're kidding. Who would dare to do something like that? And that is when she revealed that it was Haman, whom the king had promoted. Well, there were a couple of king's guards there who said, well, not only that, but Haman has built a gallows in his own house so that he could hang Mordecai.
Really tall one.
A really tall one. And so the king was just beside himself. He said, well, then you're going to hang Haman in those gallows. And that was what was accomplished.
So tell me, after her 3 days of praying, she was in this divine state of thought. Now, Did she go and tell Haman, I love you and let's be friends?
If she went and hugged him. Oh, no, she didn't.
She did. She exposed it. And so she exposed it and so destroyed it. And what Parthen said in his article, he impersonalized it. It was an animal magnetism, trying to commit genocide. We, in the lesson, and this will be good for a watch message, the despotic tendencies inherent in mortal mind and always germinating in new forms of tyranny must be rooted out through the action of the divine mind. That's the nature of the beast. If someone's in the human mind, whether it would appear the bad human mind or the good human mind, it's all bad, and it's a killer. It would try to destroy you. Always does that. It must be exposed, rebuked, and either repented of, and as we said, all of that, or it will destroy itself, as we've read.
Haman refused to repent.
So,
well, I think that's what's really interesting about Haman is that, what I think you can learn from this is that you don't accommodate error or try and work it out, because as the story progresses, Haman, keeps, like we'd say in today's terms, he keeps doubling down.
yes, that's right. That's true.
He digs himself a deeper
Yes.
hole.
He was very, very angry and very self-righteous, and all of those things, all of the qualities of the human mind, and that took him down. What did it say about Jesus' rebuke?
Fearful. Fearful.
Yes.
Fearful to whom?
To the human mind.
Yes. Thank you.
The only civil sentence which he had for error was, get thee behind me, Satan. Yes. Still stronger evidence that Jesus' reproof was pointed and pungent is found in his own words, showing the necessity for such forcible utterance when he cast out devils and healed the sick and sinning. You mustn't be afraid to wield that sword and speak forcibly. She's saying it's a necessity. She did it herself. Mrs. Eddy did it herself. He rebuked sinners pointedly and unflinchingly because of what? Yes, he was their friend.
The best friend they could ever have.
Thus the cup that he drank, because that brought out the wrath. It led to his crucifixion. They were furious at him. Now,
And Mrs. Eddy talks about this. She mentioned somewhere that people didn't understand the discomfort that they felt when they were in Jesus' presence.
or the discomfort they would feel sometimes reading the textbook.
I think something interesting about the way Esther went about this is she did not respond in kind. She was very thoughtful about how to approach the king. And then she was more factual about what was going on than getting into the same way that Haman was and saying what a terrible person he was and that you've got to do something about this, So I think that's an interesting lesson, because what Haman did was really egregious. But how would we respond to something like that? And just think about how Esther went about responding to that. As we said before, she didn't shrink from it and go hug the guy and say, I love you. She did something about it, but she didn't respond the way Haman was acting.
No, she didn't.
She goes higher.
She goes higher.
She went higher, and she did as God directed her. And she went to the king in a way that would enable the error to destroy itself. She didn't have to hire someone to kill Haman herself. She didn't resort to
vengeance herself. Yes. No, she rose higher, as Florence said.
And in her obedience, God kept the king awake that night.
After she was in deep prayer during that time.
Yeah, and God took care of it. This is divine justice in operation. The king had the chronicles read to him in the middle of the night, realized that he hadn't thanked Mordecai for saving the king's life.
So this is the unseen silent arguments Mrs. Betty talks about and their effect. I mean, that was what was going on while Esther was praying. This is the importance of our watching. We never know where it's going to land or what's going to happen. Maybe what things will change, what revelations will be revealed to people who need to have their revelations revealed. But it has to be a consistent way of living. So, let's see, to get back to Parsons and what he wrote, and now he's, after talking about Washington, then he explains how Esther did that watch, impersonalized Haman, seeing it for animal magnetism, and was able to effectively deal with it. This is the importance of a watch. But in his blog, he's also bringing out, what was Washington saying in his farewell address? Linda just read it.
The dangers of letting go of spirituality.
Yes, Christianity, how important it is. How important it is. The dangers. The last thing he told everyone. The dangers of losing our Christianity. That we cannot maintain our freedom.
Or have a good government.
A government in which we are given freedom. And if freedom is acknowledged and the rights of man is acknowledged, as in our Declaration of Independence, if we lose that. And this is a large part of our watching now, because it's very at work to get us to lose it, and very secretly and in a very in an accepting way, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's not so bad. No prayer in schools. I don't know why that's wrong or why that's taken away. We had a discussion on that several months ago. The woman who instigated it. But then Parsons also sent me something which Gary will mention.
There's a publishing company called Houghton Mifflin, which publishes most of the educational books. Apparently, and we're tracking this down now, but apparently Houghton Mifflin is now owned by a private equity firm, one of whose major partners, not the major partner, is the royalty of Dubai. So the owner of the company that publishes all of the books that our children read in school is a Muslim country. Now, one of the things Parsons noticed is that in a lot of our children's textbooks, there's Washington's address.
Yeah, he says at one time that was included. Of course, any reference to that is now verboten. Any reference to Christianity is verboten. It's being very methodically and consistently taken out of our textbooks. So, children's textbooks. So they're getting this biased sense of the history of our country. And I urge all of you, it took me a long time before I did this. One time only read science books, and there's a time and place for that too. But I've read a lot now about our American history and about our founding fathers and who they were and what they thought and their allegiance to God. And we have to be very careful that is not tampered with, wiped out. I mean, it's happening. And Carol tells me she has school children, grandchildren, and what they tell her, questions they ask. So
I was in the classroom seeing it happen just in the last couple of years.
Yes. It's going on, and I hear it in the news. So this, a lot of our watching, this is it. If you know, the red dragon rising up would try to commit genocide on Christians, get rid of Christianity, and I know, as Suzanne wrote on her blog about scornful, I know some of Christianity doesn't sound very Christian, so I say that, and so it seems to.
Well, let me say something to that. I talked about self-righteousness before, and a lot of times it seems like the criticism of our past has to do with someone being self-righteous and rules-based and saying, oh, you're not supposed to do this, and they really act in some horrible way. And so then, you know, our past gets criticized for that. But in fact, you know, we don't believe in self-righteousness. And that was wrong. Just because someone misused Christianity, thought that it was okay to be self-righteous and then do something evil, is not Christianity.
That's true. It isn't. It is not. And we're certainly not saying that the history of our country is perfect or any of these people are perfect. But who is? And who was? And are we now? All we can say is that, as far as I know, well, it was the birthplace of Christian Science. Mrs. Eddy has acknowledged it. It was the freedom of our country that enabled her to discover Christian Science, and freedom of rights and acknowledging God is essential in going forward. And I would be remiss if I don't tell you these things. Some people might not agree, and that's fine, but
some people are misled,
indoctrinated
incorrectly.
And it was also an evolution.
it was.
It was a growing.
Yes. So you remember this in your watches. This story of Esther is an important one, and I wanted to make sure we get into it enough. Tom taught it at the beginning of the year in our Bible study. It's been up on our carousel. You can listen to it. It's a story that has been very overlooked and neglected. We talked about it in our Bible study. There's no mention of God in it, but to me it's full of God. So it's an important one to understand. It's certainly one that Parthens has loved and gotten into and gleaned many lessons from. So this is how we work. Any comments or questions on this?
Isn't it the enemy that wants to destroy our Constitution?
Well, it would, yes, it would.
Yeah, that's part of it. Right.
Part of it.
Right. The human mind would like to destroy everything that is based on God.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but we don't. The American Revolution was a real, thoughtful revolution. I mean, because it challenged the status quo in the whole rest of the world. It's challenged the concept of man governing man and said, no, God governs man. And that relationship is first. And that was a revolutionary concept. I mean, it was brewing in certain enlightened countries in Europe and maybe elsewhere. It was brewing. People were coming to that thought, but the establishments, the organizations, were threatened by it, and they didn't allow it. So that's why it happened in a new land that has become known as America. So Mr. talks about it. You know, the establishment is going to feel threatened.
And it should.
By the enlightened thought of Christian Science. So it's fighting. It's fighting. So we need to be aware of it and not let it do what it's trying to do.
Time is up, but there are a few other points I'm going to still make. In Science and Health, when error confronts you, withhold not the rebuke or the explanation which destroys error. Never breathe an immoral atmosphere unless in the attempt to purify it. Who remembers where that statement is written in stone? carved in stone.
In the Mother Church?
Mother Church.
The Mother Church.
Above the reader's platform, where all can see.
It was not God is love, it is this. Never breathe an immoral atmosphere unless an attempt to purify it. She knew what was going to happen. That's why she did that. She picked those out. This wasn't picked out afterwards. She picked these quotes out. She knew we needed to be tough. She knew we needed to be aware. And when you are in the right mind, when you are out of this human mind sense of things, you will see clearly and you will see what needs to be seen. I had a lot more to cover, but I'm going
and
to...
she insisted that they carve them in the stone on the wall rather than paint them, because she knew that someone would eventually try to erase it if it were painted. Just the way they've erased the estoppel clauses in the manual. Just the way they've erased the independence of the publishing society from the deed of trust that she established.
Of the branch churches.
The way, exactly.
And erased her house.
Exactly.
Really erased it.
Again, it's happening in Christian Science. For those who want further reading about mercy and justice, in miscellaneous writings, page 260 to 261, I was going to have that read today, but we're running out of time. I'm going to have Gary read something. We've read it before, but it was several years ago, and our friend in Chatham, originally from Cambridge, sent it to us again. This is written, well, Gary will read it to you, but it's important to hear.
On May 4th, 1937, the great Christian Science teacher, Bicknell Young, wrote a letter to his colleague, Dr. Hendrik J. de Lange, in which he said, "What we have now to run the Christian Science organization, our leader never established. She set up 2 coordinating boards with deeds of trust to serve as a balance. They worked together while she was here to control them, but as soon as she left, they each wanted the power, especially the board of directors. They appealed and resorted to the advice of human lawyers and the courts. Paul appealed to Caesar. Nothing has gone right since 1910 when she left. It has not been carried on according to Mrs. Eddy's intentions. Politics, chiefly, and financial pressure seem rampant. The only answer to all that error is that the Christ must prevail. The estoppel clauses in the manual have not been heeded or obeyed. They are a protective measure to our cause. Some selfishly even tried to persuade Mrs. Eddy to remove them from the manual, but she would not, because they were divinely inspired to prevent hierarchical control and domination. Also, to gradually dissolve an organizational sense of church and being. Our office and function is to live the Christ, which is the one and only power of the one mind, life, love, being, with love and deep appreciation for what you are as the oneness of being. Bicknell Young.
So, my friends, he knew, most of them knew, and our understanding is that he was not taken out, excommunicated, because he was so popular there would have been such an uproar. So we know too, all right? We will not be fooled by error.
Take it to heart.
Take it to heart, yes. Take it to heart. We've got our work to do. We will be Esthers in our annihilation of error and our love for the truth. Thank you all. We'll see you at our service.
Thank you. Thank you.